Marcus Daniels tightened the straps on his pack, the leather creaking in the pre-dawn cold of the Montana wilderness. At 43, the lines around his eyes weren't just from squinting down rifle sights. They were etched by 20 seasons of tracking game through these mountains. This time, he muttered, checking his custom Remington 700 for the third time that morning. The .300 Winchester Magnum was oiled, sighted, and ready. He'd spent the summer practicing shots at 300 yards and beyond, preparing specifically for this hunt. Shadow wasn't just any black bear. Standing nearly 7 feet tall, on hind legs, with a distinctive white patch on his chest, the massive male had achieved near mythical status among Whitefish County hunters. 400 pounds of cunning survival instinct, Shadow had eluded hunters for 5 consecutive seasons. Marcus studied the topo map spread across the cabin table, the margins filled with notes from local guides and his own previous expeditions. Red X's marked confirmed shadow sightings. Blue circles indicated kill sites of deer and elk, evidence of the bear's hunting patterns. The markings clustered around the northern ridges, far from established trails. Outside, the thermometer read 28 degrees, cold for early November, but nothing a prepared hunter couldn't handle. The weather report had mentioned a cold front, but the satellite images hadn't shown anything severe. "You're obsessing again," Emily said, placing a steaming mug beside the map. 20 years of marriage to a dedicated hunter had taught her the signs. "This isn't just another trophy hunt for you, is it?" Marcus looked up, momentarily pulling himself from the terrain calculations. Shadow's different, smart, adaptable. The game warden says he's one of the largest black bears ever documented in western Montana. And that's worth freezing in the backcountry for a week. Emily's voice carried concern rather than judgment. "It's not just size," Marcus replied, tracing a finger along a ridgeline. "It's what he represents. Bears like this, they're disappearing. Hunting one properly, with respect, it's something I need to do." Emily nodded, understanding the unspoken. For Marcus, hunting had never been about hanging heads on walls. It was about connection to something primal, something vanishing from the world. 50 miles south, Ranger Kate Morrison scanned weather reports at the district station. The incoming system looked stronger than initially forecast. "How many permits for the North Ridge area?" she asked. "3, but 2 hunters checked out yesterday," her colleague replied. "Only Daniel's still up there." "The guy tracking Shadow?" Kate frowned. "Tell him about the weather change if he radios in." By noon, Marcus had reached the trailhead. The air had already grown sharper, carrying the metallic scent of approaching snow. He adjusted his rifle sling and checked his backup sidearm, a .44 Magnum revolver. The extra weight was worth the insurance. The first flakes began falling as Marcus climbed above the tree line. The tracks appeared 3 hours later, broad paw prints pressed into fresh snow near a half-eaten elk carcass. Recent. The bear had moved northeast toward higher ground. Marcus knelt, measuring the print with his hand, 5 inches across the pad. Shadow. Night approached faster than expected, darkness accelerated by thickening clouds. The temperature had dropped 15 degrees since morning. Marcus established a minimalist camp beneath a rock outcropping, eating cold rations to avoid cooking scents that might alert his quarry. As he slipped into his sleeping bag, the wind shifted, carrying a sound that made him instantly alert, the distant crack of breaking branches. Something large moved through the forest below. Shadow was close. The real hunt would begin at dawn. Dawn broke with painful brightness, sunlight reflecting off fresh snow that had fallen overnight. Marcus emerged from his shelter to find 3 inches of powder covering his camp. The thermometer on his pack read 17 degrees, 10 degrees below the forecast. He worked methodically, loading his pack while scanning the terrain. The bear tracks from yesterday would be covered, forcing him to find fresh sign. Hunters who rushed made mistakes. Shadow hadn't survived 5 seasons by encountering hasty men. Marcus remembered his first black bear, taken 8 years earlier in Idaho. A clean shot, a quick death. This hunt felt different, more personal, as though Shadow represented something beyond mere game. The first promising sign appeared near a frozen creek around mid-morning. Claw marks on a pine, fresh enough that sap still glistened despite the cold. 6 feet up the trunk, consistent with Shadow's reported size. Marcus studied the surrounding area, finding disturbed ground where the snow pattern changed. The bear had dug for roots, perhaps sensing the approaching weather and needing additional calories. 200 yards further, Marcus discovered scat, fresh enough to still be warm at its core. He was gaining. The temperature continued dropping as clouds thickened overhead. The National Weather Service had predicted a cold front, but this felt more severe. Marcus checked his satellite phone. No signal. He was committed now, cut off from updates or warnings. Emily stood at the cabin window, watching new weather alerts scroll across her phone screen. The meteorologist used phrases like unprecedented November cold and dangerous conditions at elevation. She dialed Marcus's satellite phone, but received no connection. He knows what he's doing, she told herself, but the certainty felt hollow against the urgency in the weatherman's voice. By early afternoon, the wind had picked up, driving needle-like snow horizontally across the mountainside. Marcus pulled his scarf higher, covering his nose and mouth. His exposed skin burned with cold. The thermometer now read 9 degrees, with wind chill pushing it well below 0. Any responsible hunter would turn back. Marcus knew this. But the tracks he'd been following had grown remarkably fresh over the last hour. Shadow was moving northeast along a familiar game trail, visible despite the new snow. Marcus had spent 15 years building a reputation as a methodical, ethical hunter. Not reckless, not trophy-obsessed. Yet here he was, pushing deeper into deteriorating conditions, pursuing a single animal with singular focus. Something about Shadow pulled at him. Perhaps the rarity of such an encounter. Perhaps something deeper he couldn't articulate. At the ranger station, Kate Morrison made a decision. The systems intensified. I'm calling everyone in the North Zone to evacuate. Can't reach Daniels, her colleague replied. No response on satellite. Kate studied the topographical display. His permit zone includes Blacktail Ridge. If he's tracking that bear, he'll be following the northeastern game corridors. You're not going up there. Visibility's dropping to 0 in an hour. Kate was already pulling on additional layers. I'll take the emergency shelter and extra supplies. If he's in trouble, he'll need more than just evacuation instructions. As dusk approached, Marcus found himself facing a difficult choice. The bear tracks led toward a narrow pass between two peaks, a direct route that would save miles but expose him to the full force of the wind. The alternative meant descending into a valley, losing elevation he'd spent hours gaining. The smart choice was the valley. The fast choice was the pass. Marcus checked his rifle, ensuring the action remained smooth despite the dropping temperature. Then he adjusted his pack and turned toward the pass. Nyama! The wind hit him like a physical blow as he emerged from the tree line. His eyes watered, tears freezing almost instantly on his lashes. Through squinted eyes, he spotted movement ahead, a dark form disappearing around an outcropping. Shadow. Despite the cold numbing his extremities and the wind threatening to knock him off his feet, Marcus pushed forward. The bear was less than half a mile ahead now, close enough to make a stalk before full dark, too close to turn back. Morning arrived with bitter clarity, the temperature having plummeted to 5 degrees during the night. Marcus's breath crystallized instantly as he emerged from his emergency bivy-sack, every exhale creating a cloud that hung suspended in the still air before slowly dissipating. He'd made an emergency camp in the lee of a granite outcropping after losing light. The decision to navigate the pass had nearly cost him dearly. Twice he'd slipped on ice-covered rock, the second time wrenching a shoulder and sending a cascade of small stones clattering down the slope. If Shadow had been nearby, the noise would have certainly alerted the bear to his presence. Marcus flexed his fingers, wincing at the stiffness. Even inside his insulated gloves, the cold had penetrated during the night. He pulled out his rifle, working the bolt cautiously. The action felt sluggish, the metal contracting in the extreme temperatures. He'd need to be careful. A frozen firing pin or stuck bolt could render the weapon useless at a critical moment. Damn cold, he muttered, the words visible in the air. He'd hunted in Montana for decades, but had never experienced such brutal November conditions. This was January weather, February weather, dangerous weather. The landscape had transformed overnight. Every surface glittered with ice crystals that caught the morning sun, creating a disorienting brightness that forced Marcus to squint even through his polarized glasses. The beauty was undeniable, but it was the beauty of something lethal, a frozen splendor that could kill as easily as it could captivate. 50 yards from his camp, Marcus found fresh tracks. Shadow had passed during the night, seemingly unbothered by the conditions that had nearly driven Marcus to hypothermia. The massive paw prints led toward a series of rock formations visible on the horizon, perfect denning habitat with caves and overhangs that would provide shelter. Marcus checked his satellite phone again. Still no signal. The battery indicator showed yellow. The cold was draining it faster than normal. He switched it off to conserve what power remained. Emily would be worried by now, perhaps already alerting the rangers. The thought brought both comfort and embarrassment. He'd always prided himself on self-sufficiency in the wilderness. Kate Morrison guided her snowmobile along the Forest Service road, the machine struggling in the deepening snow. The temperature gauge on her handlebar read -2 degrees. Her colleague's voice crackled through the radio. "Weather Service says it's getting worse. You should turn back." "Almost to the North Ridge trailhead," Kate replied, I'll assess from there. The snowmobile's engine suddenly sputtered, then stabilized. The fuel line was threatening to freeze. Kate knew she couldn't risk mechanical failure this far out. She'd need to proceed on snowshoes from the trailhead, slower but more reliable. Marcus paused to melt snow for water, his small stove struggling against the wind. Dehydration was as dangerous as the cold, perhaps more so, as its onset was subtle. He'd seen experienced hunters make fatal mistakes when their judgment became impaired by thirst. The track continued to freshen as the day progressed. Shadow was moving more slowly now, perhaps feeling the effects of the cold, or simply conserving energy. Marcus estimated the bear was less than an hour ahead. A sudden gust of wind brought an unexpected sound. A low, huffing grunt carried on the air. Marcus froze, listening intently. Bears rarely vocalized without cause. Either Shadow had encountered something unexpected, or the realization hit Marcus with chilling clarity. Shadow might not be alone. The tracks ahead suddenly confirmed his suspicion, as a second set of prints joined the first. Smaller, but unmistakably bear. A female, traveling with the male. Unusual for this time of year, when black bears typically remained solitary. Marcus unconsciously reached for his rifle, finding the action even stiffer than it had been that morning. The lubricant was thickening in the extreme cold, gradually freezing the mechanism. He worked the bolt manually several times, feeling it loosen marginally. Ahead, the rock formations loomed larger. The double set of tracks led directly toward a dark opening, visible among the stones. Marcus checked his watch. 3 hours of daylight remained. 3 hours to make a decision that suddenly seemed far more complicated and dangerous than when he'd begun this hunt. Dawn of the third day brought no relief from the punishing cold. Marcus awoke to find the temperature had dropped to -3 degrees. His water bottle, tucked inside his sleeping bag, had partially frozen despite his body heat. He'd spent the night in a natural rock shelter, halfway up the approach to the cave system where the bear's tracks led. The decision to halt his pursuit before dusk had been pragmatic, stalking a potentially mated pair of bears into their den in fading light bordered on suicidal. Now, with morning's clarity, Marcus focused on his most immediate concern, his rifle. The Remington's action had grown increasingly resistant as the temperature plunged. He field-stripped the weapon as much as possible with his limited tools, his fingers clumsy in the insulated gloves. The problem was immediately apparent. The lubricant he'd applied, suitable for normal hunting conditions, had congealed into a sticky paste that inhibited the bolt's movement. Marcus gently scraped away what he could using the small blade on his multi-tool, then applied a minimal amount of his emergency gun oil, which was rated for lower temperatures. "Should have prepared better," he muttered, working the action repeatedly to distribute the fresh oil. The bolt moved more freely, but still not with the smooth precision he needed for a reliable shot. Kate Morrison had abandoned her snowmobile 5 miles back when the engine finally succumbed to the cold. She continued on snowshoes, pulling a small emergency sled loaded with survival gear. The GPS unit on her wrist indicated she was approaching the last known coordinates from Marcus's permit application. "Daniels, do you copy?" she called into her radio, knowing the chances of him receiving on his end were minimal. Static answered her. The mountains had become an alien landscape. Ice crystals formed on every surface, creating an environment that seemed actively hostile to human presence. Marcus's breath rasped in his throat, the air so cold it burned his lungs. His satellite phone remained stubbornly without signal, the battery now critically low despite rationing its use. He ascended carefully toward the cave system, alert for any sign of movement. The bear's tracks remained clear, both sets leading into a narrow ravine that wound between towering rock walls. The confined space created both tactical advantages and dangers. Easier tracking, but limited escape routes if something went wrong. Halfway up the ravine, Marcus spotted a movement, a dark shape against the snow ahead. He dropped to a crouch, raising his binoculars. Shadow stood at the entrance to a cave, his massive form unmistakable against the pale stone. The white patch on his chest was clearly visible even at this distance. The bear seemed to be surveying his territory, perhaps sensing an intruder's presence despite Marcus's careful approach. This was the moment. The bear was stationary, presenting a clear shot at approximately 200 yards, well within Marcus's practiced range. He slowly brought his rifle up, settling into position behind a fallen tree that offered both stability for his aim and concealment from his quarry. The crosshairs settled on the vital area just behind Shadow's shoulder, the shot that would ensure a clean, quick kill. Marcus drew a breath, held it, and squeezed the trigger. Nothing happened. The firing pin had failed to strike with sufficient force to ignite the primer. The oil had frozen completely in the firing mechanism. Shadow's head swung toward Marcus's position, ears pivoting forward. The bear had heard the metallic click of the failed shot. Marcus worked the bolt frantically, ejecting the unfired round and chambering another. But the action moved as though filled with sand. The bear dropped to all fours, not retreating into the cave, but not charging either, seemingly assessing the threat. Marcus finally managed to reset the firing mechanism, took aim again, and squeezed the trigger. This time the rifle fired, the report echoing sharply off the ravine walls. But the stiff trigger pull had thrown his aim off. The bullet struck snow 2 feet to the bear's right. Shadow bolted. Not toward Marcus, but deeper into the ravine, moving with surprising speed for his size. Within seconds, he had disappeared around a bend in the narrow passage. Marcus lowered his rifle, heart pounding. His primary weapon had become unreliable in these conditions. The backup sidearm remained functional, but required close range, dangerously close for a bear of Shadow's size. The smart choice was retreat. The hunting choice was pursuit. Marcus checked his compass, noting the position of the sun. 3 hours of good light remained. He rose and continued up the ravine. The ravine narrowed as Marcus advanced, its walls rising 30 feet on either side. The confined space amplified the sound of his breathing and the crunch of snow beneath his boots. Shadow's tracks remained clearly visible, the massive paw prints now joined by the smaller set Marcus had identified earlier. 2 bears. The implications kept circling in his mind. Black bears typically mated in summer, with females denning alone during winter pregnancy. A pair traveling together in November suggested something unusual, perhaps a late estrous cycle or simply an atypical social bond. Whatever the reason, it doubled the danger Marcus faced. He paused to examine a scrape in the snow where Shadow had changed direction, heading toward a side passage that branched from the main ravine. The smaller tracks continued straight ahead. The bears had separated. Marcus faced a choice: follow Shadow or track the female. He'd come for the legendary male, but splitting his attention between two animals in this terrain was tactically unsound. Training and experience told him to focus on a single quarry. He turned toward the side passage. 20 minutes later, Marcus emerged into a broader area where the ravine widened into a small basin surrounded by rock formations. Several dark openings punctuated the stone face opposite his position. Cave entrances of varying sizes. Shadow's tracks led directly to the largest opening. Marcus scanned the area carefully through his binoculars. No movement, but something about the scene triggered his instincts. The fine hairs on his neck rose. He was being watched. A flash of movement caught his peripheral vision. Something shifting position on a ledge to his right. Marcus turned slowly, bringing his rifle up despite its unreliability. The female bear stood on a rock outcropping 15 feet above and 30 yards away. Unlike Shadow's black coat, hers had a brownish tinge common in some black bear populations. She was smaller, but still formidable, probably weighing around 200 pounds. She made no aggressive move, simply watching him with dark, intelligent eyes. Marcus remained absolutely still, aware that any sudden movement might trigger a defensive response. The standoff continued for nearly a minute before the female huffed once and retreated from the ledge, disappearing from view. Marcus released the breath he'd been holding, muscles aching from the tension. The encounter confirmed his suspicion. The bears were working together, the female potentially serving as sentinel, while Shadow denned in the cave. It was behavior more commonly associated with grizzlies than black bears. Another unusual aspect of this hunt. Kate Morrison paused at a ridge overlooking the northern valleys, scanning with binoculars. The distinctive shape of human tracks crossed a snowfield below, recent enough to remain visible despite light snowfall. She adjusted her course to intercept the trail. "Base, this is Morrison." She spoke into her radio. "I've got tracks heading northeast toward the cave systems on Blacktail Ridge." "Copy that." "Weather's deteriorating again. Another front moving in by nightfall." "Understood. Continuing pursuit." Marcus knew he should retreat. 2 bears, unreliable equipment, dropping temperatures, no communication. The risk factors were accumulating beyond what any reasonable hunter would accept. Yet Shadow was close, possibly within the cave, just 100 yards from his position. He'd come too far to turn back. Marcus worked his rifle's action repeatedly, trying to distribute what remained of the oil. The bolt moved marginally better, but the firing mechanism remained suspect. He transferred spare ammunition to his jacket pocket, where body heat might keep it from being affected by the cold. The female's appearance had changed the dynamics entirely. If he approached the cave, he'd potentially be caught between 2 bears, Shadow emerging from the front, while the female attacked from behind or above. Marcus considered his options. The light would fail within 2 hours. Setting up an ambush position and waiting for Shadow to emerge would be the safest approach. But the plummeting temperature made a prolonged stationary wait dangerous. The decision crystallized. He would approach the cave cautiously, using the terrain for cover. If Shadow emerged, he would take the shot. If the rifle failed again, he would retreat immediately, rather than press forward with just his sidearm. Marcus checked his compass one final time, then began his approach toward the cave, where the most dangerous game of his hunting career awaited. Marcus advanced toward the cave entrance with measured steps, using scattered boulders for cover. The ravine had fallen silent. No wind, no wildlife sounds, only the soft crunch of snow beneath his boots and his own controlled breathing. 50 yards from the cave, he paused behind a large rock formation, studying the dark opening for any sign of movement. Shadow's tracks led directly inside, with no exit prints visible in the undisturbed snow. The bear remained within. Marcus unslung his pack, setting it silently beside him. He would move lighter from here, carrying only his weapons and essential survival gear. The temperature had stabilized around -5 degrees, his exhaled breath forming ice crystals on his beard. He worked the rifle's action once more, feeling the mechanism resist despite his earlier maintenance. The cold had penetrated the metal completely now, contracting the precision machined parts beyond their tolerances. He had perhaps one reliable shot before the bolt would freeze again. It would have to be enough. A sound from above made him look up sharply. The female bear had reappeared on a ledge 40 yards away, watching his approach. She hadn't alerted to his presence yet, but her position gave her a clear view of the basin. If he moved into the open to take position for a shot at the cave entrance, she would see him immediately. The tactical situation had deteriorated beyond acceptable parameters. Marcus had hunted dangerous game across 3 continents, but never had he deliberately positioned himself between 2 apex predators. Yet Shadow was just yards away, the legendary bear, whose elusiveness had become almost mythical among local hunters. The culmination of a pursuit that had consumed Marcus for 3 seasons. He made his decision. Moving with glacial slowness, Marcus edged from behind the boulder, keeping his profile low as he advanced toward a fallen tree 20 yards ahead. The position would give him a clear shot at the cave entrance, while providing partial concealment from the female's vantage point. Halfway to the tree, his boot struck loose stone beneath the snow. The resulting clatter echoed through the basin. The female reacted instantly, rising to her full height with a warning huff. Marcus froze, half exposed in the open ground. The bear's dark eyes locked onto him, her head swinging side to side in assessment. From the cave came a deeper rumble. Shadow had been alerted by his companion's warning. Events accelerated with terrifying speed. The massive male emerged from the darkness, rising to his full height at the entrance. Even at this distance, the white patch on his chest stood out starkly against his black coat. Marcus raised his rifle in one fluid motion, years of training overriding the fear that threatened to paralyze him. The crosshairs settled on Shadow's chest. He exhaled, squeezed the trigger. The rifle fired, the report cracking sharply across the basin. Shadow staggered as the bullet struck, dropping to all fours with a roar that seemed to shake the very ground. But it wasn't a killing shot. Marcus worked the bolt frantically, feeling the mechanism bind as he'd feared. the spent casing ejected, but the bolt refused to return fully forward. Shadow charged. 400 pounds of wounded, enraged black bear covered ground with shocking speed. Marcus abandoned the rifle, drawing his sidearm in one smooth motion. The .44 Magnum felt reassuringly solid in his grip, unaffected by the cold that had disabled his primary weapon. 20 yards. 15. The bear was closing too quickly. Marcus fired twice in rapid succession. The first shot went wide. The second struck Shadow's shoulder, but failed to slow his charge. 10 yards. The third shot caught the bear in the chest. Shadow faltered, momentum carrying him forward, even as the light in his eyes began to fade. 5 yards. Marcus's fourth shot struck the bear's skull just as Shadow's massive form crashed into him, driving both hunter and hunted to the ground in a tangle of fur, snow, and blood. For several heartbeats, neither moved. Then Marcus struggled out from beneath the bear's weight, his left arm screaming in pain where claws had torn through his jacket. Blood, his own and the bear's, steamed in the frigid air. Shadow lay motionless, the legendary bear finally brought down. The white patch on his chest was now stained crimson. A warning huff reminded Marcus of the second threat. The female remained on her ledge, watching but not approaching. After a moment that stretched into eternity, she turned and disappeared behind the rocks. Marcus sank to his knees beside Shadow's body, adrenaline ebbing to leave him shaking. The cold rushed in immediately, seizing the opportunity presented by his torn clothing and exposed skin. He needed shelter, fire, and medical attention for his arm, in that order. The cave beckoned, but entering a bear's den carried its own risks. The female might return, or other predators might be drawn by the scent of blood. The distant sound of an engine echoed through the ravine, a snowmobile's distinctive whine carrying in the clear air. Help was coming. Whether it would arrive in time remained to be seen. Blood froze on Marcus's sleeve as he worked, field dressing the claw wounds that ran from elbow to wrist. Shadow's final mark upon him. Beside him lay the massive bear, steam still rising from the body. The white chest patch stood out starkly against the black fur. "You gave me a hell of a chase, old man," Marcus murmured, touching the coarse fur with his uninjured hand. The approaching engine sound grew louder. Marcus fired a signal shot from his pistol. Kate Morrison appeared first, navigating her snowmobile through the narrow passage, a second ranger following. "Deep cuts," Kate observed, examining his arm. "We need to get you to medical care." She glanced at Shadow's form. "That the legendary bear?" Marcus nodded. "Tracked him for 3 days. "And your rifle froze," she said, noting the discarded Remington. "Everything froze. Had to finish with the sidearm." Marcus winced as she applied antiseptic. "There's a female around too, watching from that ledge." The evening light was fading rapidly. Kate addressed the immediate concern. "The bear. We can't transport him tonight. Need to get you to medical attention." Marcus looked at Shadow's body. Leaving the animal overnight went against ethical hunting principles. Yet the alternative risked 3 lives in dangerous conditions. "We'll mark the GPS coordinates," Kate continued. "Return tomorrow with proper transport." They covered Shadow with snow, and Marcus placed his hunting tag on the animal. Before departing, he took a final look at the snow-covered mound. Shadow had eluded hunters for 5 seasons. Even in their final confrontation, it had nearly cost Marcus his life. Emily was waiting at the ranger station, relief turning to concern at Marcus's bandaged arm. "Just a scratch," he assured her, the lie transparent. 2 days later at the trophy shop, the taxidermist asked about mounting options. The traditional shoulder mount would showcase the bear's impressive size, yet something about that felt wrong for this particular animal. Just the patch, Marcus decided. Mount just the white chest patch on a simple plaque. 1 year later, that small white patch hung in Marcus's study, a modest memento of an immodest animal. Beneath it, a simple brass plate read, "Only Shadow." November 2023. That same month, a game camera captured an image that circulated widely among local hunters. A female bear with a distinctive white chest patch, followed by 2 cubs with identical markings. Shadow's legacy continued in the mountains of Montana.